The King's Indian attack, where white plays with knight f3 and then g3 early, is a systematic method of play which finds favour with a certain type of player. In general, white takes sharp moves out of the equation in this opening, relying on plans and ideas to see him through the opening and into the early middle game. And many players like to play this way, just to kind of avoiding a lot of sharp theory. It's noteworthy that Bobby Fischer used to mow down all manner of opposition using the King's Indian attack, but that was at a time, of course, when theory wasn't anything like as well developed as it is today. Nowadays you've got typical games in virtually every opening which help players to orientate themselves in every type of position that can possibly occur in the opening phase of the game. Nevertheless, the King's Indian attack continues to enjoy some popularity at even the highest levels. And so my BCM game of the month for June 2014 is the interesting clash between Ian Nepomnianatchi and Dmitry Yakovenko, which was played in the Karpov-Poikovsky Grandmaster Tournament, currently taking place in Russia. And this game was played on the 20th of May 2014. Now, I think it's fair to say that the King's Indian attack isn't played so often at the highest level, mainly due to defensive systems based around the move c6. Black basically puts a brick wall in front of any white bishop on g2, and it's not too difficult for him to get his queenside pieces out. What you often find in queen's pawn openings or flank openings is that Black has a devil of a job getting his queenside pieces out to good squares. Well, in this system, it's not quite like that. And in fact, if we would just go back one move, Black may even play bishop g4 here. That's been very successful for him. He usually can play c6 a bit later on anyway, but he can play bishop g4 first. And of course, there are systems with bishop f5 to consider. But here, Yakovenko with Black seems quite happy to go back into a French defence, and this is precisely the system which Bobby Fischer was smashing up with white all those years ago. Now, of course, this can come from the move e4. Nepomnianatchi plays e4 now on move 7, but he could equally have played it on move 1. And Black very confidently goes into a defensive system, which I think I'm right in saying was developed successfully by Wolfgang Ullmann into Grandmaster play. Black plays an early b5. He relies on his sturdy defences on the king side to see him through, and he continues without delay developing counterplay on the queen side with the help of a very rapid pawn advance there. White, meanwhile, plays standard moves on the king side. h4 gains space, and White's got a couple of interesting attacking ideas once he's played that move. He can subsequently advance the h-pawn up to h6 to try and puncture a hole in the black king side, or he may use the pawn on h4 to support moves such as knight g5 or maybe bishop g5. I think it's to White's advantage in this position to somehow get the dark square bishops off the board if he can manage it. And a bit later on, there will be all sorts of sacrifices on f6 and h6 coming up once those bishops are off the board. And you can see if White manoeuvres a knight to g4, how a sacrifice on f6 and h6 might come about. Well, as I say, Yakovenko was going into this with his eyes open. There have been some Ullmann masterpieces with Black where he's managed to survive the White attack and duff White up on the other flank. So the game naturally continues. In this precise position, White has a choice, I think, between three interesting plans. He can play his bishop out to f4. That's one idea. He can get on with a knight manoeuvre up to g4 by playing knight 1 h2. Or, as Nepomnianatchi plays here, he can quickly advance the h-pawn up to h6. As I say, to more or less force g6 from Black. And now it's just a question of where White goes from here. Black, for his part, relies on moves such as a3 and knight d4 to work up counterplay himself. It was Fischer who showed that perhaps allowing a3 by Black was not such a good idea, and that's why White plays a3 in this precise position, to try and limit Black's counterplay on the queen side. Yakovenko took, and White recaptured with the pawn. Now, after a3, it has to be said that Black was by no means obliged to capture that pawn. He could easily have continued with bishop a6. This is the Ullmann method, and after bishop a6, black's looking at moves such as b3 at the right moment to undermine the white pawn chain. Play might continue, knight e3, queen out to a5, knight to g4, and only now does black take on a3, with interesting play after rook a b8. From this you can see that the King's Indian attack leads to very complex situations. It's been touted as the ideal opening for the club player, but I've never been sure about that, mainly because the middle game positions are so complex, and you can see one of them in front of you here. I suppose the attraction is the winning attack on the king side. You know, if white gets the big punch in first, he can finish black off, and a lot of players like that. Well, going back to Nepomnianatchi versus Jakovenko, black opened up lines on the queen side and played bishop a6 just now. White played knight h2, and again we reach a position where black's got a choice. He wants to play knight d4. The question is, where should he put his pieces before he actually plays that move? Now in the game, Jakovenko played rook c8. I mean, that's pretty logical, given that he wants to shove that knight into d4. He's expecting white to take it. The c file opens up. The rook seems to be in the right place on c8. Nevertheless, rook b8 is a decent alternative. And this was played in the game Nakamura versus Leiko, Beijing 2012. Nakamura played knight g4 and Leiko put his knight in. White took it. Black recaptured. And now after bishop d2, queen c7, queen f3, and now rook fc8, black had, I think, pretty good counterplay. In the game, Nakamura played queen f4, and Leiko answered perhaps erroneously with queen to d8. What he should have done was play very boldly here with queen takes c2. And this would have led to a really complicated position where actually black's chances are no worse. The point is that when white goes bishop b4, angling to get the dark square bishops off the board so that he can move in with knight f6 check, black has the, again, very bold move g5. And however white plays in this position, black is getting really interesting play together. For instance, if white were to go queen takes d4 here, we take on b4, now that the queen has been deflected from the king side, and go queen takes d3. I don't think black is worse here. If going back to g5, the engines suggest queen f3 is a good move, then we have the tremendous move rook takes b4. And after a takes b4, bishop takes d3. Now the boot is very much on the other foot, as black assumes a very strong initiative. And if white plays rook c1 here, we're happy to chop this off twice and go bishop b5. With a nice blockade, where I think white's queen is not quite as good as black's pieces. So, unravelling all the way back to knight h2, rook b8 is a definite alternative here, and queen b6 is another way to deploy the black forces, getting ready for knight d4. So it's all a question of choice. Jakovenko went rook c8, and now the game proceeded, much as we've seen before, with black putting his knight in on d4, white chopping it off, and now bishop d2. Well, Jakovenko's next move, rook to b8, would suggest that perhaps rook b8 was better first, rather than rook c8 straight away. I think the main reason he plays rook b8 in this position is that he feels he has to stop bishop b4. That is white's positional threat. Getting those dark square bishops off the board really would accentuate the dark square weaknesses on black's king side. So black feels rook b8 is a good move, and he's certainly thinking about rook b2. And now comes a very unexpected turn of events as white plays rook a2. A very peculiar defensive looking move, but it's connected with an astonishing idea here. Nepomnianatchi played queen to a1. This is very weird, or at least it's very weird looking. Perhaps as the idea becomes clear, it's not weird at all. It's just positionally very well motivated. Point number one. White attacks the pawn on d4, forcing black to defend it. I mean, I don't think black can just let white have that pawn. Secondly, white's preparing bishop b4 again. He reasons that once he plays that move, black's got to take it. And once black does take it, there's going to be two white pieces attacking a4. I think white's pawn structure is better than black's in this position. And so the liquidation of all the queenside pawns would actually favour white in a positional sense. So queen a1 is just a very interesting idea. And black elects to defend d4 by playing queen to b6. My own preference, I think slightly, would have been for bishop c5. So that after bishop c4 we play queen e7. Kind of retaining contact a little bit with the king side. And if white takes this off, we're going to play rook f b8. To me this looks okay for black. When black can keep the retreat of the queen open back to either e7 or f8, he should be okay here. But Jakovenko decided to play queen b6. White went bishop b4, bishop c5. So black's got the same idea going, but his queen's in a different place. I prefer it on e7, but that's another matter. We should just confirm to ourselves that if black took on b4 twice in this position, rook takes a4 would favour white. As I say, I think white's pawn structure is a bit better in this position. And black's got some problems with his pieces. His pieces are on slightly unstable squares here. I don't like the fact that black knight is tied down on d7 to guarding f6, for instance. So Jakovenko doesn't take. He plays bishop c5. White goes knight h2. Black plays knight b8. Now that white's gone away from f6, black feels he can move his own knight. White takes on c5. And now queen to c1. So that queen on a1 wasn't completely out of play. And she hadn't given up hopes of a kingside attack. So white is going to manoeuvre his pieces, getting that queen to the kingside as quickly as possible. And now the attack builds again with the help of ideas such as knight g5. And of course it's worth noting here that white is suddenly attacking d4 one more time. So black moves in with counterplay, as he must. But of course black plays this with a heavy heart because he's allowing white to exchange off that funny rook on a2. Well, in view of black's attack on white's queenside pawns, white's got to proceed speedily. So knight g5 looks just about forced. And black drops his queen back to e7. Well, he could have gone all the way to f8, eyeing up the pawn on h6. Then we'd probably get the sequence queen takes d4, rook takes c2, queen takes a4, queen c5. I still like white here after queen f4 and then rook e3. Maybe that's the reason that black didn't do this. So going back to the game one more time, queen to e7. And now bishop takes d5. Well, this is a powerful attacking blow. And it's based on the notion that black can't take this bishop. If he takes, e6 is crushing. F takes e6, rook takes e6. Black's got to play queen f8 and now queen takes d4 with a winning attack. I'm sure both players had seen this variation and Jakovenko planned to answer bishop takes d5 with rook takes c2, and that was the move he played in the game. This is probably okay, this position for black. Of course, it's tense. Black might be running out of time. You've got to play it correctly. Obviously, white's queenside is there for the taking if black can just hold his kingside together. So bishop c4. Now, whether objectively that's the best move is open to question. It certainly has a desired effect in this game, but maybe bishop g2 was better. Just shutting up shop for the time being with bishop f1, giving us time to play our knight to e4. I mean, this possibly was the best way of playing for white. But bishop c4 has the desired effect. The bishops come off, and now a mistake is prompted out of black as he plays d3. Prematurely, as it turns out. What he should do is play knight c5. Braving queen takes d4. As after that, black can go queen takes g5 and then lop off that pawn on h6, when I think black is okay. Once that pawn on h6 disappeared, he's not getting mated anymore. And now counterplay should be forthcoming, with moves such as queen d2 available. if going back to knight c5, rook d1 was played, then I think black can just take on c4. It's very important that knight on c5 prevents knight e4 from white. So if queen f3, setting up some ideas, we get a kind of mechanism here by which both players agree that basically this position is equal. White can't take his eyes off h6, meanwhile black can't take his eyes off f7. So objectively, I think this would have been the best course of action for black. Instead, he charges forward with his d-pawn all the way, loses the d-pawn, and black's hoping knight takes e5 will bail him out, but queen b2 is just an excellent move. As long as that pawn on h6 is on the board, black is in serious trouble. He's got back rank problems, he's got problems with g7. Of course, this prevents him from playing queen takes g5, because queen b8 leads to mate straight away. So black played queen to d6, and now another excellent move by Nepomnianchi, very powerful move, c5. A deflection which black can't accept. If black takes on c5 here, knight e4 is a killer. And white's just got too many threats. The main threat of which is f4, of course. That's a crushing idea. A check is no good. White just moves his king. Black's out of checks and out of tactics. So going back one more time to the game, c5 happened. Black played queen d1 check. He put his queen on d5. This seems to gain a little bit of time. But once again, ruefully, Jakovenko sees that he can't capture on c5 because of knight e4. And once again, f4 will be the killer idea, which wins outright. So in the game, one more time, black played king f8. White marched forward. The c-pawn is invulnerable. King came to e7. And now the pawn marched forward one more time. Black resigned. There are too many difficulties in this position for black to negotiate. White wins handily. So I thought that was a typical and very interesting example of modern day kings in attack. Black went into the whole thing with his eyes open, but at the critical moment he came up short in a very complex position. So well done to Nepomnianchi for revitalising the kings in attack, if you will, and a very well played game by White.